In the ancient Stone Age of 2012, Jon Jones would be the first UFC athlete to sign a deal with a big clothing apparel in Nike. Being one of the first UFC fighters ever to sign with one of the biggest brands the world has ever saw was insane for Jon Jones at the time, considering he's only 24 years old. But just a short 2 years later, he would lose this deal. This is how it unfolded and took place. In 2011, Jon Jones would become the youngest champion in UFC history at just 23 years of age, defeating Shogun Rua, and then would go on to have 4 title defenses before he would be signed by Nike. Jon Jones seemed like the perfect fighter for Nike to sign at the time, considering he was so young, so dominant, and was squeaky clean at the time. Now, this wasn't just huge for Jon Jones at the time, this was also huge for the UFC, something that the UFC would definitely want Jon Jones to go forward with. The UFC at the time was a sport that was trying to appear more professional to people, as it was still kind of seen and had the reputation as being a kind of poor man's sport. It didn't have the credibility of basketball, football, or anything as the sort. So for the most respected and most known sports, for the most respected and most known sports apparel brand to sign a UFC fighter was huge at the time to give the sport more credibility. And it has to be remembered, this was before Conor McGregor ever came to the UFC. This deal is something that could put Jon Jones into superstardom at the time. Now, everything was going well at first. Jon Jones would get a shoe in 2013, the Nike free trainer 5'0" Jon Bones Jones. The shoe was an instant hit with fans, selling out at the time just 2 minutes after the release. Jon would also have a Nike t-shirt released around about the same time, which was also proved to be extremely popular with fans and also sold out first day of launch. So things seem very lucrative right now for the UFC, Jon Jones and Nike, but there was an issue. Every time Jon Jones went into the octagon to wear a piece of Nike apparel, Nike had to pay $50,000 to the UFC, okay? And $50,000 may not be a lot to a brand like Nike, but it can be seen as disrespectful, as a slight, as an attack or a diss or a diss on them. But this wasn't anything at the time that made it seem that Nike would want to cut their contract with Jon Jones. Now, things would be going well up until 2014 went on. Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier would have a face-off and would actually have a brawl. Now, this was obviously a very bad look for the UFC and Jon Jones at the time. It's reinforced the stigma of the UFC being a barbarian sport and how it was for smooth brain and idiots. And for Jon Jones, it looked extremely unprofessional, and it was the first thing on his squeaky clean record that wasn't so good. Now, literally around about at the exact same time, Nike would cut their deal with Jon Jones, and they would say it's because they didn't want to focus in MMA, didn't see it as worthwhile. But most people were in agreement at the time that this was just a cover-up. And the reality of it is that Jon Jones fumbled this deal by getting into that brawl with Daniel Cormier. Companies like Nike and Adidas are known to be extremely harsh with stuff like this, as even though they have no problem having children in factories having to work for them, if any athlete does something even somewhat wrong, then it's a crime against humanity, and they want to try to keep their image of being this lovely, beautiful, whatever company. Now, this was quite a loss for the UFC at the time, and they would have to settle for Reebok to be the big brand sponsored by the UFC, and this would go on for years. And while Reebok is a big company, they're second tier to the Nike and Adidases of the world in current day. Ain't the 90s anymore. So this wasn't just a fumble by Jon Jones. He also fumbled the chance of the UFC being seen as a legitimate sport for a few years until Conor came and revamped the landscape. Now, in the long run, did Nike make the right decision? No shit, okay? We all know what Jon Jones did after a lot of things, you know? And every single one of those things would have gotten cut from the company, and that would have been valid. But this story is just another case of Jon Jones fucking up in some way, shape or form. Anyway, man, that's it for me today. Like, subscribe, do all that. Enjoy the rest of your day, man, and I'm out.